Welcome to another illuminating episode of Divine Decode, where inner mastery meets practical wisdom. Today, we are joined by Jeff, who is a lifelong martial artist, meditation teacher, and guide who has spent over 3 decades helping people awaken their inner strength through the art of yielding. Jeff's work bridges discipline and softness, performance and presence, ambition and inner stillness. And together, we'll uncover how the meditative arts can become not just a practice, but a way of living, an evolving path that sharpens the mind, steadies the heart, and refines the spirit. First of all, welcome, Jeff. Welcome on the show. And I'm really grateful to host you today. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
That's great, Jeff. Okay, to start with, when you talk about creating a life practice through the meditative arts, what does that actually look like beyond the cushion or the dojo, right? So, what does it look like in your terms, and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, so with the meditative arts, there's 5 different paths that people will follow when they come to the practice, and they could be either the performance side, which is what a lot of athletes turn to the practice for because it helps with teaching them how to improve their mind-body awareness and their coordination, their ability to elevate the spirit while at the same time relaxing and being focused. Then there's the therapeutic path, which is more geared towards our health and mobility, our flexibility, our strength, our overall longevity. And a lot of people come to the meditative arts to learn how to just age more gracefully and stay in the practice and give them something to do that puts them in a positive frame. Then the third pillar is the medical path, and this is geared towards helping people through ailments and sicknesses and injuries. And, all of Chinese medicine is based off of Qigong theory. The fourth pillar is the philosophical side of the practice. And I've always been really passionate about this side of the practice because I find that it expands your peripheral vision, so you see things from multiple angles. That helps you be more strategic, is very deep side of the practice. And then lastly, the final pillar is the spiritual side of the practice. Now, once we have a path or maybe a couple directions that we wanna focus our efforts on, then we wanna integrate ritual, active, and philosophical practices to help create an evolving life practice with the meditative arts. And when I say ritual practice, what that means is it's where we set time aside every day on a consistent basis to maybe do a sitting meditation practice or a movement meditation practice like a Qigong set. Some time where we're taking ourselves away from our cell phones and from screens and just turning our focus inward. Now, along with that ritual practice, it's good to have active or reset practices that we can integrate into the day in everything we do. And these are great because they help us live the practice as a lifestyle rather than a hobby that we're doing once in a while. And these practices can be done when you're walking down the street or you're standing in line at the grocery store. And there are ways that we can bring our awareness back into the present moment with breath work strategies or with energetic circulations in the body or maybe subtle movement energies that we're playing with. And so we'll have a combination of these ritual practices that we do, our active practices, and then also philosophical practices to help train the mind and make us more focused throughout our journey. And so when we have an approach that helps us find ritual, active, and philosophical practices that guide us down one of those 5 paths that we decide to pursue, this will help us down that journey of integrating the meditation practices into our life.
Mhm. That is so, so much grounding. And I love that. Because it turns practice into something fluid and alive and not rigid or intimidating. And thank you so much for that framework. Also, your entire philosophy, it centers around yielding rather than resisting. And in a world which is obsessed with force, performance, and pushing, how does yielding become a source of genuine power for you? And how do you see yielding in your journey?
Yielding is one of the concepts that we use in both the meditative and the martial arts, and it's something that has always really inspired me. And oftentimes, when people hear the word yielding, they get a little bit turned off by it or think that it's giving up or being passive. And it couldn't be further from that. Yielding is not about giving way so much, is it's more about being strategic and learning how to guide the energy down the path of least resistance so you can get where you need to go. And it's used in military battle, it's used in combat, it's used in conversation, it's used in our interpersonal communication, it's used everywhere in life. And I've broken down in my most recent book, The Yielding Warrior, I've broken down this concept into three different categories. So we have physical yielding, mental yielding, and emotional yielding. Physical yielding is the idea that I push you, you push me, whoever's the bigger, stronger person with the most leverage eventually is going to push the other person over. But with yielding, instead of us trying to see who the bigger meathead is, when you push me, I get out of the way of that force. And now I can respond with less effort. So I'm not trying to butt heads with you and see if I'm bigger and stronger than you. Now, this is obvious how this is beneficial in athletics because oftentimes you're coming up against opponents who are bigger, stronger, and faster than you. And if you try to meet that force head on, you're going to lose that battle. But learning how to redirect that and make it to a point where you can respond with less effort can help you get ahead in those scenarios. And that's how you hear so many stories about in combat in martial arts through the generations where a smaller opponent will defeat a bigger opponent. And that's from being able to understand this physical style of yielding. Now, in order to be good at physical yielding, a lot of things have to come into play. You need to be well rooted. The lower part of your body needs to be strong and flexible so you can change your central equilibrium without getting tight. The body has to be relaxed. The mind has to be present. And with these things, that's a lifetime journey to really master these skills. However, once you've reached a competent level in seeing these things, and this happens, when you start a meditation practice, it's a lifetime journey to get to a high level. But from day one, you start to see these things with more clarity and more detail. And when you see them in yourself with a little more awareness, you also start to see these things in other people, which is where it starts to get really interesting. So, say, for example, you and I are having a conversation, and I say something that unsettles you, and I pick up on it right from that first sign of imbalance. Now we're moving into what I call mental yielding, which is the second pillar. Once I notice that imbalance, I can adjust the conversation and bring us back to center rather than not paying attention, where pretty soon I'm so far off track, you want to knock me upside the head. And so learning how to use yielding in all of our interactions is extremely powerful. One, we're being more considerate, which is something that we could all do a little more of. And two, it allows us to be strategic so we can guide these conversations to a positive outcome with the least amount of resistance. And then the third and final pillar of yielding is emotional yielding. And this is very much like mental yielding. However, it's with our own interpersonal conflicts. So you think about oftentimes something will happen to you and you'll respond. and you'll go down this path. And you might get an hour, a day, a week down the road and realize maybe that wasn't the best choice. But with yielding, if we could notice that imbalance when it first happens, or maybe sit back and be more present, more aware, not let our emotions get involved, oftentimes we can make a more educated choice that's going to save us a lot of heartache on the other side. And I've been explaining this idea of yielding now for many years. I've been running my academy for over 30 years here in Portland. And one of the most common things I'll hear people say is, yielding makes a lot of sense, and in fact, I do yielding all the time. Well, I would agree in that I think everybody does some degree of yielding all the time. However, it's kind of like if you or I were to walk into a crime scene with a detective who's been on the job for 30 years, I guarantee you that detective would see things about the series of events and the timeline that I know at least I would have no clue of. The meditative arts helps us see things inside of ourselves and inside of other people that I truly believe most people will go through life and never have any clue of without having a meditation practice in their life. And so you can just see by these different pillars that yielding can be applied to anything we do in life. And it's a very powerful concept, which is why I've been so passionate about it and why I wrote my last book on the topic.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for also mentioning your book. And I truly, truly love the insights. And that is actually true, right? Yielding is often misunderstood as passivity. And that is what I understand from it. And thank you. Thank you so much for that. Also, that redefinition is liberating. And the perspective, it actually answers it also. Again, it makes sense. Also, you've trained athletes, entrepreneurs, and everyday seekers. So, what shifts do you witness when someone blends physical discipline with meditative awareness? And I want to know if there is a moment, uh, a breath, a movement, or a breakthrough where you actually see someone drop out of their mind and into their body and then blend physical discipline with meditative awareness. So, yeah.
So yeah, there's quite a few directions we could go with that. So I think that when somebody comes to the practice, oftentimes there's many different times along their journey where they'll have these different realizations. And it's one of the things that I've always really enjoyed about the practice because the more consistent you are, and by doing a practice like this, you start to see things at a different level as the practice progresses. So, for example, oftentimes I've had teachers show me something or tell me something about a concept in the meditative arts or life. And when they first tell me, it'll spark ideas, or maybe I'll have an understanding at that point in time. But then through the years and the practice, it might be 3 years or 5 years later, something in my practice will come to a point where I'll have this aha moment, and I'll realize that's what he was talking about. I had no clue before, and it took all of that time before that realization happened. And I see students having these all the time, and they'll come and tell me about them. And that's uh, one of the things that I think helps fuel the practice when you have those aha moments, or moments of, enlightened awareness, if you will. And so that's a very powerful part of the practice. When it comes to building and creating a practice for newer students, this has been something that I've struggled with for a long time. And it's very difficult trying to get a new student to understand the benefits of a practice like this and why it's important to stay consistent so they reap those benefits. And so I've tried my whole career trying different things to get people to understand why this practice is important and how they can use it to improve their lives. And I've tried all different combinations of things. And lately I've been using this thing I call the three considerations. And I find that if somebody new is coming to the practice and they spend some time thinking about these three different areas, they're much more likely to stick with the practice and get to the point where they start seeing things on a deeper level and really getting some of the physical, mental, and emotional benefits from the practice. And the first consideration is taking some time in the beginning to think about what it is that's drawing you to the practice. Do you want to take stress out of your life? Or maybe you want to stay healthy into your later years to watch your grandkids grow up. Or maybe you have an anxiety disorder, or you suffer from panic attacks. Or maybe you're a performer and you want to learn how to perform at a higher level. Whatever it is for you, spend some quality time really hitting home what's the most important for you. And then take it a step further, and once you have that, think of 10 or 20 things that will positively change in your life by accomplishing this goal. Maybe it's your interpersonal communication or your relationship with others or your performance or whatever that is, and use this as fuel so we have more depth in why we're coming to the practice. Then I also like them to flip the coin and think about 10 or 20 negative things that will happen if they don't do this practice. And what this does is, we all face those days where it's time to get up and go do our practice. The alarm goes off and we don't feel like getting up to go meditate. Well, if you have a good reason why, now instead of thinking of it as a chore that we have to do every day, we start to look to it as something we get to do and we're inspired to do it. And we feel lucky to have that time because it's making so many positive changes in our life. And so having this awareness and this understanding is extremely important. Then the second consideration is understanding the idea of consistency. And like anything you want to master, consistency is the number one thing to help us accomplish that goal. And there's this old Chinese story that I really enjoy about the stonecutter who is very well known all over China. And he makes these beautiful sculptures of animals and landscapes. And his work is so unique and detailed that anytime somebody sees his work, they just know it's his. And because he's so much different and so much more detailed than other sculptures, he'll have people from all over the country that will come and stay with him for years at a time to study with him and learn the trade. Well, every morning, this old stonecutter, he begins his day by going down to the river and meditating. And one morning after his meditation, he's walking along the river and he has this profound vision of this big 6 foot tall, mystical Chinese jade dragon. And he's so taken by the vision that he just knows this has to be his next project. So he spends the next few months traveling all over looking for the perfect stone for his new creation. Once he finds the piece of jade, he brings it back to his place. And for the next period of time, day in and out, he just sits with the stone. studying the curves, trying to envision how this dragon is going to appear in the stone and feeling the energy that's coming off the stone. Finally, when he begins working on the stone, he carefully places his chisel on the backside of the rock and starts tapping away with his hammer, hundreds, if not thousands of times to the exact same spot, and there was no change. A few days went by and still nothing. A few more days went by. Some of his apprentices started second guessing him and wondering, why doesn't he try something else? He keeps doing the same thing and nothing's changing. A few more days went by. Finally, he tapped the stone, and this big 3-foot section of the stone separated and created this smooth, slightly curved line that was soon to be part of the dragon's back. And one of his apprentices who was watching asked, "How did you know that that strike was going to break the stone?" And the stonecutter replied, "It wasn't that strike that broke the stone. It was the thousands of strikes before it that broke the stone." And with a bit of a discouraged tone, the apprentice said, "But I've been watching you and there was no change. Why keep doing the same thing over and over?" And the stonecutter said, "Each strike was not wasted. Not only was the stone changing beneath the surface, but so was the one who wields the hammer. And the reason why I like this story so much is that this is the meditative arts. We don't always see the change happening day to day, but through our consistency and our repetition, we're laying the foundation to reap our benefits from this for the rest of our lives. And so it's so important to have this idea in mind when we start our practice. And then the third and final consideration is understanding that you need to have a guide in your corner to help point you in the right direction. You know, I've seen people that have been self-taught and tried to sift through the thousands or if not millions of videos out there on YouTube and this app and this book, and they're trying to figure out how to create a life practice with the meditative arts. And oftentimes they'll spend 10, 15 years and barely even scratch the surface on what their potential is. And so having somebody in your corner to help point you down the right direction can save you an immense amount of time, and you'll get a lot more benefit out of your efforts. And so these three considerations, understanding why you're being drawn to the practice, being consistent and having some fuel there to light the fire and keep you training every day. And then lastly, having somebody in your corner to help show you the ins and outs of the practice so you can get the most out of your time. If you do these three things, you're so much more likely to have just much success with your practice and get a lot more out of your efforts.
Hmm. I love that. And that invites such powerful reflection. Thank you again for that. And and your experience and the insights that you've shared. I'm sure that, this practical clarity, it helps listeners choose a starting point that feels natural and not forced. And that brings me to the last question of this conversation, that you often speak about the art of growth, right? So what does sustainable lifelong growth look like when rooted in meditative practice instead of, ambition driven striving? And for somebody who fears that inner work might unravel their identity or it might disrupt their comfort, what is the first reassurance that you offer? So there are just two things that I want to know: that what does sustainable lifelong growth look like, and when somebody fears in to take steps or to do this inner work, how do you help them with this?
As far as how I help them, I teach them about the overall umbrella, if you will, of all of these different meditative practices and the different paths that you can follow. So I help them narrow down what it is that will give them the most benefits that they're looking to achieve and incorporate practices that will help them along the way. As far as your growth, this is something that naturally happens with the meditative arts. But I think something to make a note of and that's really helpful to understand along the lines of growth is that, in today's fast paced world, we're so bombarded with, you know, our cell phones and advertisements and different things that are coming around that we're so distracted that oftentimes we feel this pressure when we're around other people to almost as if we're wearing a mask. Sometimes we don't want to say something that's going to hurt their feelings, or maybe don't want to truly tell them how we feel. And so we put up these barriers to protect ourselves. And when we don't have an outlet or a way to let these masks fade away and these barriers disappear, sometimes it gets to the point where you wake up in the morning and you go to the bathroom and look in the mirror and you're still wearing this mask. And the meditative arts helps us let go of these barriers that we have so we can stay truly connected to who we are. And if you don't have that core ability to do that, growth next to never happens because we're so distracted and we're so busy putting up these walls to different people and different things that we're trying to do that it hinders our growth. And so meditation helps us stay close to our root, to stay close to earth, if you will, and find that foundation so we can grow and we can blossom. And that's one of the benefits of this practice is that by being open, being present, and being aware of how we are physically, mentally, and emotionally, it allows us to not only get the most out of the present moment, but it also allows us to guide our energies in a positive direction towards things that we want to accomplish. And so it helps so much with um, high performers and athletes who really want to get to that peak performance state and want to accomplish more. And that's why you see so many professionals as far as CEOs and entrepreneurs and athletes these days and musicians and artists who are turning to the meditative arts because there's so many benefits from the practice. And so if you're thinking about starting a practice like this and you haven't before, the one thing I would like to tell you is that if you just devote 20 minutes a day to a practice like this and you stay consistent with that for a year, integrate a few active practices into your day, you'll see so many benefits by the end of that year that you'll never stop doing the practice. You'll do it for the rest of your life. And so invest a little bit of time in yourself. The Dalai Lama once said that everybody should meditate for 20 minutes a day unless you're too busy. Then you should meditate for an hour. And I love that saying in that it's so important and so true. A lot of people think that I don't have time for that or I can't, I've got too much going on. It's my opinion that you don't have time not to do that. Because if you're not staying connected to who you are and you're not increasing that awareness and that presence, you're just wasting your life away. And so having that ability to be more present and more aware in everything you do is extremely valuable.
It genuinely is. And I love the spirit, that grounding reminder. It brings courage to those who feel the call to evolve but are scared of the unknown. And thank you for that. What a powerful journey today into the meditative arts, into softness as strength, and into the quiet intelligence that lives within every breath. Jeff, thank you for inviting us into this field where the outer warrior It meets the inner sage. And to everybody who is listening, if something stirred within you, a question, a recognition, a pull, please honor it. Let it become one breath, one intention, one tiny shift in awareness. And transformation does not begin with force, it begins with noticing. Until next time, keep exploring, keep softening, and keep decoding the wisdom within. I am Pragya, signing off with gratitude and presence.